Well, hello again. This is my fifth video blog to expose the Dutch government cover-up of a massive security breach which has gone on since June 2011. Just as a brief summary of what was covered in the previous four movies, I have detailed exactly how the breach developed, that the breach did affect some of the world's most important organisations, including the British and American military, the United Nations Development Programme, the European Commission and the World Health Organization. In fact, the breach affected all Allied service personnel who were in Iraq and Afghanistan. If they used the satellite telephones in those army bases in Abu Ghraib and all those other places to call home, then they were affected by this. There was many thousands of soldiers in Iraq and Afghanistan during the last 5-6 years. All of those people used the phones. That is the scale of how many people were affected by this. The British Ministry of Defence resolved these security issues years ago by building their soldiers their own state-of-the-art satellite communication system for their calls from Iraq and Afghanistan, so they can now call their families in the knowledge they are calling securely. Excellent. However, to still cover it up 3.5 years later, that's not acceptable, really, it is not. So, as the Ministry of Defence have now resolved those security issues, in fact they resolved them years ago, why on earth are they still helping the Dutch government to cover up a massive security breach which affected thousands of their soldiers and went on for years? Ultimately, the Ministry of Defence had to decide whether to back their own troops and their families who were the victims of the security breach, or to continue to help the Dutch government to cover up the existence of the breach. This is outrageous. British families were put at risk for nothing, and the Ministry of Defence is still covering it up 3.5 years later. On the 13th of November 2014, I wrote to the British Home Office to request that they lift the reporting restrictions, sometimes known as a super injunction, so that the British media can report on what really happened. Here is my email to the Home Office and their acknowledgement of receiving my email. You may need to pause if you want to read this. On the 13th of November, I also contacted Mr. Nigel Farage of the UK Independence Party to see if he can do anything about the cover-up. Here is the email that I sent to Mr. Farage, and the auto-replied to prove that he received it. When I spoke to Mr. Farage back in June 2011, he suggested that I speak to the Public Accounts Committee. So I know he will speak to me if he's able to do so. However, the fact that he has not replied after a month would imply that the super injunction is preventing him from speaking to me. I'll give him the benefit of the doubt because he was always such a nice chap. English business etiquette requires that I wait 30 days before claiming a no reply. Well, I've waited more than 30 days because it's now the 17th of December and I sent it on the 13th of November. As the British government have not replied or lifted the reporting restrictions, it's apparent that they're not planning to do anything about this. This is outrageous. I'm a British citizen. This affected British citizens. For them still to have reporting restrictions in place 3.5 years later, outrageous. To me, that did seem like a betrayal of the British troops and their families who were the victims of this security breach. The Ministry of Defence would still be helping the Dutch government to cover up that the breach even happened. Outrageous. However, I'm not a British soldier, but I would be interested to hear what British soldiers and the families of British soldiers think about all of this. You can leave a comment, or you could send me an email at dutchcoverup@mail.com. Can you help with this by sending an email to your national governments? If you live in an EU country, could you please email your national MEPs and forward them to the link in the description to my YouTube channel, which has all the details. The previous movies are all on that YouTube channel. And if at all possible, could you also copy me in on the email to the members of European Parliament at dutchcoverup@mail.com? It would be useful to have a list of officials who knew all about the Dutch government cover-up. In this situation, the American soldiers at the bases in Iraq and Afghanistan were among the victims of the security breach because they were let down by a substandard subcontractor here in Europe. If the US Army wants a copy of the documents of this case, they just have to ask me. If your government does business with the Dutch government, please send them the link to my YouTube channel with the details of the complete lack of internet security in the Netherlands. I would be happy to bring a copy of the documents to their embassy in the Netherlands. Or they could just email me at dutchcoverup@mail.com.